I want to thank uh, everybody for joining us, and thank Envision Marketing for uh, helping us organize the IT for this. And we're very excited to have Mark Glick, our Chief Energy Officer for the state of Hawaii, uh, introduce this session, which is about geothermal energy and the Maori experience. Mark previously worked at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and is very well versed in the Hawaiian side of the geothermal uh, potential for Hawaii. And we have Nona Tauda, our main speaker, and Nona is soon to be a doctoral as a doctoral candidate, soon to finish his PhD at the University of Auckland. And Nona has done extremely interesting work combining ancestral, if I can put this right, religious belief in different aspects of volcanoes and combine that in an algorithm with modern science as a way of determining the potential of geothermal sites in New Zealand. And there's so much that New Zealand can teach us about geothermal. They've been doing this seriously since 1958, and they produce 7,500 gigawatts of electricity, 17% of the nation's total. So we're very interested, and many of these things are done. Many of these projects, I think there are 19 generating plants in New Zealand, and many of these are done in joint ventures with local Maori communities. So we're very excited to learn, all the things that Nona has taught and his students and the writings that he's done. So thank you, Nona. Aloha, and thank you for coming and joining us. And we also have Nicole Lautsey, a professor of volcanology from the University of Hawaii, who was just in New Zealand. And thank you and for joining us. And we have
Mike Kalakini.
Mike Kelekini, who's thank you, Vice President for Hawaiian Affairs for Ormat from the island of Hawaii. And thank you, Mike, and Mike and Nona know each other. So this is this small world that we're in the Pacific. And I think I would just like to end my introduction by saying one thing that years ago, King Kalakaua had this vision of a Pacific regional area where Hawaii was sort of played a large role as an intellectual center. And I think now, as we're discussing these new changes in energy and renewable energy and the possibility of making hydrogen, maybe this is coming true, and this regional hub in the Pacific is becoming more and more important globally. So thank you all for attending.
All right. Thanks, Michael. And this is really kind of neat because I know all the speakers pretty well. I got to spend some time with Nona talking about this, but the part that Michael mentioned about really kind of tying science to tradition is Nona's, I'd say, his specialty. And the reason we wanted him to present today is because Hawaii has a similar scenario where we have indigenous populations and traditions that sometimes come into odds as we move into the policy sector and government. And we wanted to get his insight on how it's done in Aotearoa down in New Zealand. And he's just got great insight on that. He's worked in the field, but he's also a PhD candidate. He's got an engineering focus, but he's also a traditional, native born and raised Maori. So good to have you here. We're going to start off today, though, with Mark Glick from the State Energy Office. He just started that up again recently. And so, Mark, take it away.
Thanks so much, Stan. Really a pleasure to be here, and good to see you. Also, good to see our essentially one of the great economists of Hawaii, Eugene Tian, joining here. So always a pleasure, and of course the esteemed panel with Nona, and of course the invitation from Renew Rebuild. I'm very pleased to be here. I wanted to kind of provide some introductory remarks. Some of it's pretty obvious. I mean, you already know that Hawaii is a leader in this drive for clean energy, and it has established itself as both a policy and a deployment leader. You know, in policy, the first state to commit to 100% renewable portfolio standard through binding commitments through law. Very first state to do that in the nation. California, and now I think nearly a dozen others have pushed for significant high rates of renewable penetration, and almost half the states with binding RPS laws. We're also ahead of schedule officially. I would have to say that the 2030 40% RPS is modest. We had attempted to change that to 60% when we passed the 2015 100% standard, but fortunately the utilities are pushing ahead at a faster rate. We're roughly at 40% on average from renewable resources. So we're already at that modest 2030 goal. But as you know, you'll see we've really blasted beyond that. Each island, of course, is different. Different characteristics, different resource potential, and renewable resource profiles. Kauai, you really can't, because of endangered species, use utility scale wind, but they have more hydro because of its legendary rainfall. The island of Hawaii has geothermal, and as we'll hear from Nicole, you know, there's promise for, you know, great heat from geothermal and other places, and of course, shallow heat or shallow wells with lesser heat that can be used for a variety of other purposes. So geothermal is an important resource, but we have to do a lot more to get a handle on how to best utilize that. And of course, we'll talk a little bit about the special significance of dealing with a public trust, certainly where the ownership is truly the public. And in essence, we've been advised by a number of Native Hawaiian leaders and others to not ever make the presumption that, you know, this resource is just there for the taking. It needs to be done with the appropriate guidance and input from the public. Oahu tends to be is widely regards to be the most challenging island to meet these high rates of renewable portfolio standard because it's the most populated island, and it has the least ability to match its demand with locally produced renewable energy. So that's another area where I think geothermal and hydrogen, as I'll talk a little bit, can play a significant role. But I'd also like to dive a little bit deeper in terms of how we get to high rates of renewable up to this point where this question of firm or dispatchable energy comes into play above 80%. What we looked at, you know, again, looking at this most difficult case, Oahu, that study fairly recent.
Yeah,
Hello? A fairly recent analysis by the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, where I came from before accepting the appointment from Governor Josh Green. HNEI had done analysis that showed planned additions of solar and solar plus wind can get us to 70% without significant curtailment. It's an important finding because it means that essentially the things that are on track will get us to high rates of renewable without enormous technology changes or even significant technology changes. And what HNEI did was it took the 2030 load profiles from the Integrated Resource Plan process that Hawaiian Electric has undertaken with guidance from the PUC. And and HNEI analyzed the stage 1 and stage 2 solar projects. They also added to that, and that's of course assuming that they can be fulfilled. And as we know, there's some challenges to that, and we now have the stage 3 projects. But just looking at the stage 1 and stage 2, assuming they could be completed, and adding the H-Power waste to energy plant, and of course the continued distributed energy resources, and the CVRE, the community-based renewable energy, basically small utility scale expansions as a starting point. That's really the roughly a 50% renewable energy scenario. Then HNEI ran utility dispatch models to estimate the amount of variable generation and the firm flexible capacity that's really needed to achieve 100% energy from renewables with widely varying solar conditions. And importantly, modeling and estimating those periods, those long extended periods of low solar resources, in order to come up with kind of unbiased, objective analysis on this, you really need to take that in consideration. And as we know, there's periods when we can be socked in with bad weather or rainy weather, and the solar profile is very low. Sometimes the wind is totally still. So we assumed kind of the build out of solar. When I was at HNEI, and of course, this analysis was led by Rick Rocheleau, the director. Basically, the assumption was the building out solar and wind until curtailment becomes significant, and then adding in the firm power is needed to reach the 100%. As the analysis, as you added the amount of renewables, the discovery was that to reach 70% renewables would require about 2,000 gigawatt hours, about 800 megawatts of solar plus storage beyond stage 2. So this would be stage 3 and stage 4, which are anticipated, using about upwards to, it might be a little bit overstated, 6,000 acres of land. Nothing that isn't doable. For Honolulu, that would probably require the coexistence of ag that serves our food and energy needs. And then converting 40% of our light-duty vehicles to EVs would require another 900 gigawatt hours per year. So the 70% system still needs a minimum of 650 megawatts of what we'd call firm dispatchable capacity to cover that seasonality and those multi-day low wind and solar events. But the bottom line is that the analysis shows that reaching 70% or a little bit beyond that is reachable, renewable is really possible. Of course, Hawaiian Electric has made very strong pledges that it would be there with its decarbonization strategy. And that's really far beyond, I think, where most modelers had thought we could take this just 3 or 4 years ago. And then above and beyond that, we have the Kauai situation, which I'd be remiss in not highlighting. That's Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, KIUC, and its plans particularly with the AES West Kauai Energy Project, which is, as you probably all know, the pumped hydro renewable energy project will lift Kauai, where it's 70% today, to, close to in the high 80s or early, low 90s. So it estimates
Recording in progress.
It estimates that the renewable energy purchased under that PPA will contribute about 22.7% to KIUC's 2024 RPS. Again, that would place it at extremely high rates of renewable. But there's still the final stage that essentially all islands are going to need to deal with. And meeting that dispatchable energy needs will be a key. So a little bit about geothermal and hydrogen. It obviously gets progressively more difficult the higher we get. Not impossible, but just difficult. And, as we certainly believe we can get to about 80% perhaps in most places with the existing available technologies like wind, solar, battery energy storage systems, pumped hydro. But the real interesting issue is, we only have at least commercially available proven sort of geothermal on Hawaii Island. And obviously previous attempts, and there certainly are no existing plans to move energy or electrons that might be generated from electricity created from geothermal to other islands. And there's a lot of technical issues, and of course there's other issues. It would be extremely expensive as well. And there hasn't been any recent studies. There was a study conducted around 2013, 2014, series of studies, actually 4 different ones that looked at creating a grid tie between Oahu and Maui. But there hadn't been any real, analysis, certainly since then, looking at trying to move electrons from Hawaii Island. So that brings in hydrogen. Hydrogen could very well be the storage medium, generate electricity to produce hydrogen through various means. Again, with close consultation with the communities and with the Native Hawaiian community in particular as well, to see how that could be appropriately done. We've certainly seen ORMAT do it very effectively, safely, reliably in the Puna district. And, we suspect there would probably it'd be appropriate to look at other places as well. And that would be clearly things that with our recent efforts, as you all know, working towards a hydrogen hub with a full proposal that actually will be submitted next week. A key part of that plan is to look forward, again, with the communities on the role that hydrogen can play under expansion, but also with under the core work that ORMAT has already done to reach sort of the limit of its resource potential under some of its current permits. And in our consultation with a number of Native Hawaiian and other community leaders, that appears to be a very reasonable approach. So we're excited about those opportunities. Again, everything has to be done extremely appropriately, and it takes time. And but there, with our application due next week, we have really put some interesting next step plans into place that we will want to follow up on immediately. And I have to cite the tremendous amount of work on that hydrogen hub proposal that's gone into that application, of which we're cautiously optimistic about where we stand. We're one of 32. There were 33, but 2 of them came together. So it puts us kind of at a 1/3, a 33% chance if you just look at the numbers. But in essence, I think we, have anywhere from a 1/3 to 50% chance on being able to secure that. But I am really looking forward to today's discussion, because there's a lot that we in Hawaii can learn from the Maori and the New Zealand experience on how to rethink our approach to geothermal resources It's always been inspiration to me. I spent 7 years at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and was able to, was able to communicate on a variety of different projects with New Zealand and, of course, the Maori community from time to time, and have always appreciated what could be learned there. So, the idea, I think, is that whether it be used to produce hydrogen or to provide electricity or heat source to Hawaii residents, geothermal is an important resource, and we shouldn't overlook it. It would be a crime to overlook it. In fact, we should learn from history and not repeat it. New Zealand has produced electricity from geothermal since the late 1950s, and as we'll hear from the discussions, and particularly from Nona, who I'm very interested in his keynote, that the process was painful, I think, for the Maori people. But things are different now, and we need to do things differently here in Hawaii too. So as Stan mentioned, I came back to the Energy Office for another tour of duty, this time as under the new statute. It's now a cabinet position called the Chief Energy Officer. And before that, I oversaw policy and innovation at the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute at the University of Hawaii. And between those assignments, as I mentioned, worked on economic development at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So all of that has really informed our approach. I am trying to build in those lessons into what we do, and would love to build closer collaborations with our friends around the world, and particularly in New Zealand, as we take these next steps. And so I'm just delighted to be here. Again, thankful for the invitation, and can't wait for this panel discussion once the speakers have made their presentations. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. We really appreciate it. And just a reminder to everyone, if you're not on mute already, we try and keep everybody on mute, so like you don't hear my rooster in the background and things like that. And also, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll try and put the questions together at the end and talk to everybody and get answers. And so just a couple administrative notes there. Now for the man of the hour, Nona Taute from New Zealand. Looking forward to hearing his presentation. So Nona, take it away.
Kia ora, everyone. And yeah, thank you, Michael and Stan, for inviting me. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to be here today and to give this presentation. I've been preparing it for the last couple of months now, and so I hope that you find it interesting.
I'd just like to give a shout out to someone I meant to highlight, which is Nicole Lotzi, as being really our resource leader in the state, understanding this resource. And we hope by the end of this session, we can get some more resources to you to do more work.
Thanks, Mark.
As said, my name is Nona. I'm a PhD student at the University of Auckland, but I've also been lecturing there for the past 4 years in construction management and engineering admin. So forgive me if this presentation starts to sound like a lecture. I've been asked to speak about the geothermal context here in Aotearoa and the implications of my PhD on that geothermal context, and also the involvement of the Maori people in that context. But before that, I'll probably just give a quick overview of my personal connection to geothermal resources. In about 1200s, the Te Aroa Waka travelled to New Zealand and landed right here at Maketu. From there, they travelled throughout the central North Island, and together they formed the Te Aroa tribe. So within Māoridom, there are various tribes, and I am a part of the Te Arawa tribe of the Central North Island. That white line there in particular is my direct ancestor, Tamate Kapua, who settled over in Rotorua. So when I recite my pepeha, what I say is ko te arawa te waka, ko te arawa te iwi, ko Rotorua te roto, ko whakapau ngākau te maunga, ko ruamata te marae, ko Ngāti Uinuku kōpako te hapu. And Stan and Michael just made me aware that iwi in Hawaii may be interpreted as bones. And that's the same here in Aotearoa, because ko iwi means bones. But just know that iwi in this context means tribe, and hapu means sub-tribe. And so I'm going to be saying the word hapu quite a lot in this presentation, so just be aware of what that means. In this last photo here, you see the boundaries of my sub-tribe, my hapu, of Ngāti Uinuku kōpako, and we sit on the eastern side of Lake Rotorua. We have some claim to Mokoia Island at the center of the lake, and we also have the sole claim to the Rotokawa geothermal field directly below us. So growing up in Rotorua, and particularly being a part of Ngāti Uinuku kōpako, I was raised in and around geothermal resources. This is a geothermal hot pool built by my hapu, just a couple 100 meters from the front door of my parents' place. And this is free of charge for any member of the hapu. This is my parents' house right here on the eastern side of the lake. When my koro owned that house, his land extended all the way up to the lake, and he also had access to what was called the Kāramuramu geothermal hot pools, which were scattered along that eastern side of the lake. However, in about the 1960s, the airport, or the Rotorua Council, acquired this land via Public Works Act to build the airport. When they built that airport, not only did they take my koro's land, they also removed the geothermal hot pools in that area. And so not only did I grow up around geothermal resources, but I also have, me and my family also have a personal, I suppose, vendetta against culturally insensitive engineering, particularly in the context of geothermal resources. So that was a bit about me and my connection to geothermal. Now let's get into the geothermal context here in Aotearoa. So these are our geothermal fields, and as you can see, it's pretty heavily concentrated in the Central North Island. And there's a bunch of different volcanic processes that make this happen, but I won't go into any of those because we have far more capable people able to explain these sorts of things. Now, the two regional councils of this area have classified each of these fields as one of these 5 top categories. So we have development systems, and these are systems that prior to the 1990s were already being developed. And the reason they're classified as development fields is because when they began this classification endeavor in the 1990s, they saw these fields were already being developed, and so they said, oh, well, let's keep developing them. Let's keep allowing them to be developed, so long as those developments are fairly sustainable. We then have some fields that are limited development, and here developments are allowed, except they have to be, they're significantly smaller than a geothermal power plant. So they're typically a geothermal greenhouse or a hot pool. There's a few photos to set the scene of some of our larger geothermal power stations. They are quite protruding, but for the most part, they're all fairly sustainable for all the reasons that geothermal development is sustainable and reduces greenhouse gases and all that. We then have research systems, and these are systems that we don't know enough about yet in order to be able to predict how they'll respond to geothermal engineering or development. So for the time being, they're still being researched and they're pretty much protected. We then have these protected systems, and these are systems that we know have geothermal features that are vulnerable and sensitive to geothermal development. And so we classified them as protected, which means that no development can occur on them whatsoever. And then we have small systems which aren't as prioritized by our regional councils. They're still overseen, but a lot can be done on them with not much oversight from the councils. Setting the scene again, here are some geothermal features in Aotearoa. Right. A fun fact is that every square meter in New Zealand, for every square meter in New Zealand, there is at least one hapu that have an ancestral claim to that land. This map here shows the hapu boundaries of ancestral claim throughout New Zealand. And these maps are based off the understanding of Māori land just prior to the arrival of Europeans. And at that time, these boundaries were very well defined. Not one hapu overlapped with another hapu. However, as you can see here, there's a lot of overlap. And the reason for that is because after European settlement, after the New Zealand land wars, and after a lot of land was taken from Māori, these boundaries became blurred. And so when it came time to make these maps, the arguments and the uncertainties between these boundaries had to be reflected. Today, however, these maps are fairly well respected and accepted within Māoridom. Each hapu accepts the land that they have claim to, and they also accept that they may share a claim with other hapu. In my opinion, these maps and the acceptance of these maps is the biggest difference between Hawaii and New Zealand. And it's also the biggest enabler of Māori autonomy in geothermal development. Because Māori over here wanting to develop land wouldn't have to argue with Māori over here about what's happening on their land. So they're pretty independent in the decisions that they're able to make on their land. So while some hapu have ancestral claim to land, some hapu also have a claim to Māori land. And so these blue spots here, they identify Māori land blocks. And some hapu also have a claim to Māori geothermal land. So some of these land blocks have geothermal resources below them. And so for the hapu that have these claims to these geothermal land blocks, they're able to develop geothermal facilities on their land however they please, so long as they gain resource consent from the two councils, so long as they stay within their means, and so long as they stay within the limits required by the two councils in terms of how much take they can extract from the geothermal resource, how much they can discharge into the environment, and so on. And so a hapu that has capitalized on that is Ngāti Tū Wharetoa. A long time ago, owners at Ngāti Tū Wharetoa amalgamated their shares in their Māori land, and they formed the Tuarōpaki Trust. After that, they managed to develop a geothermal power station, geothermally heated greenhouses, and geothermally heated dairy processing plant, alongside their other business of forestry and farming. The example set forth by Tuarōpaki is what a lot of hapu want to achieve, a lot of hapu with Māori land, which has geothermal, that is. However, it's important to note that in Tuarōpaki here, the land was quite barren, shrubland. There were no geothermal features on the land. And so when it came time to develop the land, there wasn't much to consider, and that there weren't many limitations for Tuarōpaki, which enabled them to develop these quite substantial developments. For other hapu, their geothermal land might have geothermal features on it, might have sacred sites. They may have other things to protect. They may have to share a claim with another hapu. And so there's all these other factors that come into play. And so perhaps for those hapu, developments might not be able to be as substantial as what we see here. With all that said, what is the Māori involvement in the geothermal industry today? Well, we have some Māori who own geothermal land, and we have some Māori who don't own geothermal land, but they have an ancestral claim to that land. Most of the geothermal facilities in Aotearoa are owned or partly owned by Māori. We have several geothermal power stations, Mōkai, Ngā Awa Pūrua, Kawero and Te Ahi o Maui. Now, Kawero is an interesting topic because prior to the 1990s, Kawero was a major geothermal development area. There was extremely protruding geothermal facilities and intrusive, and the iwi and the hapu had no say whatsoever in what was happening to the land. In some cases, the Tasman pulp and paper mill was discharging its waste into a geothermal lake that the hapu relied on for a lot of recreational activity. That hapu then made a claim in the 1990s to the Waitangi Tribunal. Following that claim, the Waitangi Tribunal made recommendations to the government, and the government awarded to the hapu in Kawero the rights to the geothermal resources there in Kawero. And so now the hapu, or Ngāti Tū Whare Geothermal Assets Limited, is their name, their business name. They own all the rights to geothermal resources in Kawero, and so the extraction of geothermal fluid that was already occurring prior to this claim is now owned by Ngāti Tū Whare Geothermal Assets, and they sell that extraction to all the facilities that require geothermal heat to do their operations. Te Ahi o Maui is the latest case, and Mililani Trask, who spoke a couple of sessions prior to this one, she was involved in helping that development, I suppose, account for cultural interests with their native to native model. And so that Te Ahi o Maui is very well, I suppose, embedded with Māori culture and Māori mātauranga Māori. They have a lot of features about that place that incorporate Māori knowledge, and they provide a lot of benefits to the hapu as well. We then have some facilities that aren't owned by Māori, but they do provide some benefits to hapu because either the hapu owns the land and leases it out to that development, or they've managed to come across some sort of agreement between the developer and the hapu who have an ancestral claim to receive some sort of monetary benefit from the geothermal development. It's not all sugars and rainbows, though. There's a lot of geothermal power, geothermal facilities in Aotearoa that aren't owned by Māori and don't provide any benefits to Māori. And here are a few here. So we have the Wairākei Power Station, which is the oldest power station, and mainly because it was built prior to the Resource Management Act, which I'll talk about soon. There were no obligations for that power station to provide benefits to Māori, and they still don't. And then we have some old geothermal hot pools that were developed a long time ago as well. The ideal outcome for Māori, based off these, within these two scenarios where the facility is on Māori land and where the facility is not on Māori land, the ideal outcome is pretty much the same, except there may be a few differences in terms of the monetary benefits that are received to the hapu. So in both scenarios, yes, no adverse cultural effects, no adverse environmental effects. Ideally, there should be subsidized rates for iwi, subsidized energy rates for iwi, educational initiatives for youth, and employment initiatives. These are the main, I suppose, among other things, the main topics or the main outcomes that we wish to receive as Māori. Māori who own the geothermal facility, all they're looking for is a fair, equitable partnership. Māori who don't own the geothermal facility are looking for royalties for the extraction of the ancestral taonga, which does include geothermal resources, and perhaps small funding opportunities as well for iwi-led projects on the side. Te Mihi Geothermal Power Station is one example where the revenue from that station, some of it goes to the hapu, just small amounts every few years goes to the hapu, and the hapu use that money for remediation projects on the land, or for side projects that use geothermal waste heat from the power station, maybe to build a hangi pit or something like that. So there's small little funding opportunities that can come to Māori, even though they don't own the geothermal facility. While this is the ideal outcome, it's not always the case. Some developments, they barely provide for these things, and other developments, they wholly provide for these things. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of ambiguity in the legislation and in the processes that are followed here in Aotearoa. And ultimately, it's up to the willingness of the developer to provide these things. So our current legislation is the Resource Management Act. Although this is going to be repealed soon, the documents that are going to replace it are being prepared as we speak. But essentially what the Resource Management Act does is it defines that the relationship between Māori and our taonga, which does include geothermal resources, is a matter of national importance. And because it does that, developers are required to consult with Māori, have particular regard to their interests, and give genuine attention and thoughts to their concerns. It also says that good Māori representation must be found before any development begins. Engage early with Māori, so Māori need to be communicated with early on before the consent, before the consenting process is even begun. And they need to provide all information, whether confidential or not, to the hapu. However, the Resource Management Act, it does provide this good baseline foundation for Māori involvement in geothermal development, but it is very ambiguous. The words like consult have particular regard to, genuine attention and thought, very open to interpretation. Additionally, the Resource Management Act, it lacks guidance and instruction on how Māori engagement should be done, how that engagement between the two parties should be done. There's no requirement as to the outcomes of that engagement. There's no structured framework. So on a case-by-case basis, it tends to be an ad hoc process of engagement. And there is no requirement for how satisfied Māori should be with the engagement. So it ends up being a tick-the-box exercise for the developer, who all they want to do is satisfy the requirements set out by the councils and the RMA by essentially ticking a box. So we come into the consenting process, of course, facilitated by the RMA. So there are issues with the consenting process, but it's pretty straightforward. The developer prepares a resource consent application. This application involves or includes an assessment of environmental effects. It also involves a cultural impact assessment. And So in preparing that cultural impact assessment, this is where that engagement would occur. And a cultural impact assessment, it's not always required, but it's the typical deliverable of the engagement up until this point. However, it would be hoped that there would be further engagement after this consenting process during the construction of the project and its operation. Once the consenting authority, if they approve it, they'll apply these conditions and the developer has to make good with these conditions. There are issues with this process, however. First of all, because of the overlap in ancestral claims, there may be some misrepresentation of Māori, where the appropriate Māori representation isn't actually made aware of the project until it's come out of the consenting process and made public. We then have insufficient engagement time. Oftentimes, engineering projects have strict timelines, and Māori have trouble keeping up with these timelines because they don't have the resources to keep up. And so they're often left behind, which means that they're unable to raise the concerns that they had hoped they could. We then have ineffective communication. When Māori communicate their interests, these interests are often in the form of Māori values. And these Māori values, especially spiritual values, are often intangible or qualitative, which makes it very difficult for these values to be applicably integrated into engineering. We then have insufficient collaboration when preparing cultural impact assessments. Oftentimes, the developer would hand over the responsibility of the cultural impact assessment to the hapu. The hapu would then have to prepare this assessment by themselves. When they need information from the developer, or when they need further information to be able to make informed recommendations about cultural issues, all they do is end up asking for further clarification within the CIA. And so instead of the CIA providing solutions as to how the developer can address cultural concerns, the CIA just ends up asking more questions. We need further clarification on this. We need more information on this. And so afterwards, there needs to be more engagement. This means that in the consenting process, the CIA becomes quite inconsequential. It doesn't have any weight on the decision of the consenting authority because it doesn't provide the solutions. It doesn't provide solutions that can be efficiently included in the conditions of consent. So instead, there may be one or two conditions that say that the developer needs to have further engagement with the hapu in order to address or to attempt to address some of the concerns raised in the CIA. So essentially that nullifies the CIA altogether because there's further engagement required after the consenting process. And from that engagement, there may be agreements that come out of it. But again, Māori are on the back foot at that time because the project has already been consented. They have no, I suppose, there's no gravity in their concerns because the project's already consented. And so the Māori are now in this reactionary state where they just have to make the situation as best they can, provided what's happened.
Yeah, sorry.
So for the early bird.
So what am I doing in my PhD? What I've made is a framework, and this framework guides the assessment of cultural impacts.
It
communicates
for now
those.
right for everyone.
Can you
I'm
please
going
mute?
to text you right now,
Can you please
but
mute
the
if you're
team
not the
has
presenter?
agreed to it.
Mute,
So
mute all.
yeah, early bird will be
Oh, hold it, sorry.
6:50.
Who's
Amita,
that?
can
Is
you
it-
please mute?
Mute. Hello? Okay.
No. Should-
Just so you know.
Umida, that's mute. Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Awesome. So in my PhD, I know it's taken a long time to get here, but in my PhD, what I've created is a framework that can hopefully address some of these issues in engagement and in the consenting process. So this framework guides the assessment of cultural impacts. It then effectively communicates those impacts to all levels of understanding, from kids to professionals. And the reason for that is because these impacts need to be communicated to all these people. Kids shouldn't be left out. They're the future, and they need to be made aware of what's happening in their hapu. The final function of the framework is that it reveals the aspirations of Māori at the same time as assessing the impacts. And from there, Māori can then provide solutions as to how these aspirations can be met. So in creating that framework, I've compiled a list of Māori values. And in many ways, these Māori values are similar to Kānaka Māori values. And these values draw attention to the concepts that must be considered when looking at possible impacts. For each Māori value, I've gone and defined or created a list of indicators. And these indicators define the unit of measurement that can be used to indicate the well-being of the Māori value. So this unit of measurement is something tangible, it's something physical that can be used. And these indicators are particularly insightful because Māori values, as I mentioned before, they're often intangible, qualitative, especially spiritual values. And so these indicators actually take that intangibility and make it tangible. They provide a tangible description that we can use as engineers to actually make a physical change that facilitates the enhancement of the well-being of Māori values. For each indicator, I've then gone and created the set of thresholds. And these thresholds define the spectrum of measures between an enhanced Māori value and a denigrated Māori value. And I'll talk about that soon, if it doesn't make sense. The values were separated into what I've defined as the 4 components of Māori geothermal culture. So Māori geothermal culture is essentially the relationship between Māori and geothermal, and there's different aspects of this relationship. So we have a spiritual relationship, which includes our beliefs with regard to geothermal, our belief in Ruaumoko, the Māori god of earthquakes and volcanoes and geothermal activity, our belief in whakapapa, our ancestral ties to geothermal resources. These are all included in that spiritual component. We then have a customary relationship with geothermal resources, and this is our ability to use geothermal resources for things like bathing, cooking, processing medicines, and so on. We then have a political relationship where we, as Māori, want to remain relevant and want to remain as a distinguishable body who has a specific claim to geothermal resources next to everyone else in New Zealand who has, I suppose, a general public claim to geothermal resources. So we want to make sure we protect our cultural identity and have a specific right to govern over geothermal resources. There's a lot that needs to be done in that space. At the moment, the government have total control over what happens to geothermal resources because they're the ones who set out management priorities, resource management priorities, the limitations with regards to how much geothermal we can take, how big our developments can be, and so on. And then we have this, I suppose, monetary relationship with geothermal resources where Māori do wish to gain generational wealth using these natural resources. And this is one of the biggest incentives for Māori to develop their geothermal resource. If this wasn't an incentive, then the customary benefits would be enough to prevent Māori from developing, or to prevent Māori from allowing geothermal resources to be developed. The customary, these other three components, I suppose, or at least these first two components would be enough to prevent Māori from allowing geothermal development. So you don't have to read what's in here. These tables contain the values and the indicators. So this table here contains the spiritual values of Māori, which includes connection to sacred sites, the recognition of Māori protocol when engaging with geothermal resources, mana and whakapapa. We then have this table which has the customary values and their indicators. We have this table here with the political values. And so these are things like rangatiratanga or Māori autonomy, sovereignty. This is something that we wish to obtain, but we don't have it yet. Joint ventures or an equitable partnership in geothermal development. The ability for Māori to lead the management regimes for geothermal development and geothermal resources. So that goes under kaitiakitanga. And then the awareness of Māori communities, making sure that our youth are aware of what's happening. And then the last table here has one value, and that is the value of the attainment of wealth for Māori. And then there's 4 indicators that are associated with that contribute to us being able to measure the well-being of that value. So these values are presented in a paper that I published last year. And so if you want to look at, if you want to take a close read of these values, then you can have a look at that paper. Thresholds, however, I haven't published yet, so I haven't included them in this presentation, but that paper is going to be published soon, and so you could have a look at that soon when that's published. I'll probably let Stan and Michael know when that's done. So the way we measure well-being of Māori values is in terms of Māori, the life capacity or the life force, the connection between the spiritual and the physical. These are all different definitions of Māori. And the reason we do this is because we want a single consistent metric of well-being for each Māori value so that we can communicate the impacts in a brief but impactful and effective way to people who don't have the ability or the time to read technical reports. So this is where the thresholds come in. For each indicator, I've created a set of thresholds. And this indicator in particular is the modification or the alteration of geothermal sacred sites. And so these thresholds define the measure of that indicator that constitutes a -2 Māori or a completely denigrated Māori. It then defines a neutral Māori, or what we as Māori would consider to be a tolerable state of the indicator, and then a +2 Māori, which is an enhanced Māori. This is the optimal state of which we want the indicator to be. So how do we use this framework? Well, there's a need, first of all, on a case-by-case basis for the developers and the hapu to review the indicators and adjust, add indicators and take out indicators, all that, because these indicators are a starting point. There still needs to be significant engagement between the hapu and the developer, and this is what would occur in that engagement. They would then review those thresholds, make some more necessary adjustments, and then they would use those thresholds and all the information they can obtain about the project to predict the Māori state of each indicator, to predict that number of Māori for each indicator. They would then repeat that step for each phase of the project, and I'll show you why soon. Once they've done all that, once they've predicted the MODI levels of each indicator at each project phase, they can then prepare a report of impact, which would also present the aspiration of Māori for each indicator, which is essentially just to have the indicator in a state of +2 MODI. So it's fairly simple. That's how we present the aspiration of Māori, is that essentially all we want is for this indicator to have this number of MODI. And so then we provide solutions for how we can achieve that, how we can achieve the transition of MODI from a -2 to a +2, or from whatever it was to a +2. And because we have these numbers of MODI, because we've defined these MODI values, we can then summarize the impacts by averaging out all those MODI states, and provide an effective at-a-glance communication of the impacts for kids, for community members who don't have time to read reports. And this is kind of a visual representation of what that would look like. In this particular example, this is just a random example. It doesn't come from any real project. But here we have on the horizontal axis each phase of the project across its lifespan. And then we have on the vertical axis the number of MODI, or the MODI well-being of the values. So by averaging out the MODI values of the indicators and then subsequently of the values, we can obtain an average impact over time for each component of Māori geothermal culture. So here we see that in this particular example, across the lifespan of the project, the spiritual connection between Māori and geothermal significantly declines. And this is essentially just what we want to achieve. We want to communicate this as simply as possible to the Māori communities. Finally, if we want to, we can obtain a generalized overall impact on culture itself, which, you know, it eliminates a lot of information, but it provides this really simple statement about what this project will mean for the Māori culture. How will it impact Māori culture? In this case, it's going to decline the relationship between Māori and geothermal resources by 1 level of MODI, which isn't very impactful for the engineering project itself, but it just informs the community members and kids about what's happening. I don't know if I've gone over time. I don't have a timer, but kia ora. I hope you found that interesting. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I don't know when, but now or later, Michael or Stan?
Yeah, well,
yeah, that was an outstanding presentation. I mean, if I
Really?
could put it in a summary, here in the US, a lot of times the cultural impact is subject to the economic impact. In other words, the guy with the most money makes the rules, not the people that have to survive and live with it. So looks like you figured out a way to put that into a format that we could use in a formula, and hopefully come up with solutions that suit everybody and treat everybody fairly. So I thank you for that. There was one question in the chat that maybe you can address now. And the whole world is looking at the global impact of climate change and things like that. So how would a system like you're looking at be impacted when we start getting global climate change direction, or, you know, people even outside our own federal government that are trying to impose rules or standards? How would that impact, do you think, your process that you've envisioned here?
Yeah, I suppose that's yet to be seen. There is, I I know that there's some insight on climate change that's going to be in the new documents that are going to replace the RMA. But whether it's going to enable further Māori development or disable further Māori development is pretty unknown. The RMA, so everything that I've done so far is about the RMA, is according to what the RMA provides for Māori. The legislation before the RMA provided almost nothing. So this system that I've proposed, this framework that I've proposed, in those days would have had absolutely no weight. Māori would not be able to implement that at all because developers had total control. The person with the money, as you said, had complete control over what decisions were made. So yeah, in terms, I suppose we'd have to wait and see how climate change would be accounted for in these new legislations. And I know I've got a lot of work ahead of me in terms of updating the framework to be applicable within the new legislation that we're about to receive, I think, in a couple of years' time.
You've definitely put a lot of thought into it, and I think there's a lot we can learn from that. So I don't have any other questions that came in, but I want to thank you again, Nona, and introduce Nicole Lautsy from the University of Hawaii. She's from the volcanology department, and she's a professor up there. And like Mark says, she's kind of our go-to person for geothermal here in Hawaii.
Thanks, Dan. Hi all, I'm Nicole Lautsy. I'm in a research unit at UH that's called the Hawaii Institute of Geophysics and Planetology. And I think we are over time, right? So I'll just talk for a few minutes. And I think I've been invited here in that I led a statewide geothermal resource assessment between 2015 and 2020 that we were funded by the US Department of Energy, in which we were required to develop a statistical, so a mathematical method to kind of look at the probability of heat in the subsurface using existing data. And so that project really opened my eyes to how little we actually know about the extent of our geothermal resource statewide. And the kind of the simplest thing to look at is groundwater data, right? So we have water wells all over the state, and we could kind of scrutinize data that already exists for the water temperature and certain chemical parameters that can indicate presence of subsurface heat. And so it does look like there's some probability of heat statewide. We know where our volcanoes are. We know the pathways that magma uses to get to the surface across the state. And so what we're trying to look at is where there would be some unerupted magma that can take a really long time to cool, that could constitute a geothermal resource. And as Mark alluded to, after that project ended, there's been little to no funding to continue the work. But I'm encouraged that the state is continuing, and programs like this are happening, that's continuing the dialogue around geothermal. And I think all aspects, including the cultural aspects, are really, really important to consider and to be smart about, and to have lots of discussion as we try to move things forward, in my view, for our planet. And just one thing, I'm just listening to Nona, and thank you for your presentation very much. Hawaii, a difference between Hawaii and New Zealand is we don't have a lot of surface geothermal features. So if anybody knows of those, like if I'm wrong, please tell me. But I usually, when I give my talk, say we don't have hot springs, we don't have lots of locations where the steam is coming out of the ground. So when I was in Rotorua in January, I mean, it's like a little bit scary. Like you're walking around and there'll be a pool with steam coming out of the ground, right? We don't have that in Hawaii. We have volcanic eruptions, as we know, Kilauea and Mauna Loa, and perhaps more volcanoes will erupt. But we don't have the geothermal features and that's because our resource is quite deep relative to other locations around the globe. So I enjoyed your warm pools, Nona, when I was there, but we don't have that sort of tradition here because we don't have those warm pools, except basically in what's in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park right now. There's a few locations that I understand Native Hawaiians have an attachment to where there is steam presence. unless there's any specific questions, I'll end there for now.
Thanks, Nicole. And yeah, we hope what is it, House Bill 458, that
Yeah.
we hope that gets through. And it looks like it's moving pretty good. I did some testimony, and so did a bunch of other people. So I hope we make some headway there. Next on the list is we set up for Floyd, but I don't see Floyd on the thing. Is he actually on?
I haven't seen him.
Yeah. So let's go to Eugene Ken, our state economist, who's going to give us a picture of the electrical use in the state and across the different islands, and give us an idea of what we're really facing in terms of trying to meet Hawaii's energy needs that Mark Lick addressed, and what role geothermal might be able to play.
Okay, good morning.
No worries.
Oh, this is afternoon already, I think. Let me, I think the organizer want me to ask to talk about the energy burden to the local community. First, we look at our monthly electricity cost. We don't have the full energy, but the majority of energy in Hawaii on the residential side is the electricity consumption. So Hawaii is pretty high in terms of electricity rate, in terms of monthly per household consumption, and Hawaii is also high. You can see from this chart that the electricity bills is going at exactly the same direction as the petroleum price. So the petroleum price is in terms of dollars per barrel. So they go basically side by side. Then when we look at the state ranking of average monthly electricity cost, so Hawaii actually ranked the 5th highest in the nation. And the national average is about, this is 2018 data from the US Department of Energy. The national average is about 124 per month per household. For Hawaii, it's about 153. But Hawaii has, traditionally, we are high in terms of household income because Hawaii is the #1 state in the nation of the United States that we have the highest average person per household. So we are 3, the national average is 2. So the average per household is 2 people, and for Hawaii is 3. And for some certain communities like the Native Hawaiians, they are even higher, it's much higher. So because of the household income is high in terms of the percentage spending on electricity from the total household income, Hawaii is not too bad. I think we are sometimes in the middle. We are the 29th, which means that 1.9% of our income, household income, goes to electricity. So the national average is 1.8%. Hawaii is higher, but not too much higher. So we are pretty good. It's mainly because we have higher household income. And give you some other numbers as a reference. In Hawaii, we spend 42% of our income on housing. That is high. National average is about 30%. So we are 12% percentage point higher. We are 42% on housing. We are 14% on food. We are 15% on transportation. So that's some references number. On electricity, 1.9%. But when we look at the spending on electricity or the burden, is really different between the income groups. So the attention is should be the bottom of the red. So those are the federal, based on the federal poverty level. So if you look at it, the 100% or 100% poverty level, and their spending on electricity is very high, is 15.2%. So you compare with the average 1.9%. For the low income people, it's 15%. So it is very high. I think that is alarming. So it is not even in terms of the electricity burden. So for the low-income people, they do have very heavy burden. So you look at the Hawaii, we have how many people below the poverty line is about 48,321. So those 48,000 households, and we divided into homeowners and renters. So then we divided into the building structure, single family or condos. But you can see that overall is 15.2%. But the homeowners, their burden is even higher. It's mainly because their income, you look at the average annual income, is lower, is less than 10,000. At the bottom, I gave the poverty guideline for the from the federal government. If the for one person is 14,000, so if additional person, you need about another 5,000 because of the economies of scale. So if you have a 4-person, it's 14,000 plus the 5,000. So I think this is the for the low-income people. When we develop the renewable energy, and I think there may be some kind of consideration of the communities. In the state, we have about 7% of our families, they are below the poverty level. And Hawaii County is very heavy. And because Hawaii County has the heavier, they have about 1/3 of the population, they are Native Hawaiians. So you look at the map, the darker and the heavier the burden. So you look at the Oahu, basically it is all in the Waianae area. So it is heavy in terms of Native Hawaiians. And Big Island, you can see is darker compared with the rest of the Oahu. It's mainly because Big Island also have low income, have more Native Hawaiians. So then also on the island of Kauai. So I think basically this gave us some kind of consideration when we develop renewable energy, and because renewable energy will be cheaper, and then because Hawaii is about 60, used to be 70%, but in 2022, 40% of the electricity has been generated by the renewable sources. I think the plan was by 2030, but we were ahead of time. By 2022, we were already 40%. So in developing the renewable energy, especially on the Big Island for geothermal, I think that will help reduce the electricity burden, especially for the low-income people. I think that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions if you have.
Thanks, Eugene. And just for everybody out there, I've worked with Eugene for probably 12 or 15 years already. He's my favorite economist on the planet. He usually starts off with a joke, so I'm a little disappointed he didn't tell a joke right off the bat, but he makes economics personal and real. Next up, we have Mike Kalikini, who's the Senior Director of Hawaiian Affairs at Puna Geothermal Ventures in Puna. And we promoted him to Vice President of ORMAT during some of the, set out the original flyer. And fortunately, we didn't offend the actual Vice President of ORMAT, but he really should be the Vice President of ORMAT because we could use somebody like him making things work. So I hand it over to you, Michael.
Gee, mahalo, Stan. Mahalo for that promotion. Yeah, I want to say thanks to everyone, to you and Michael for putting this on, and really appreciate the keynote speaker there, Nona. Mahalo, mahalo nui. You know, I myself would be very interested in, once you get those publications, Stan, is sharing them with us. It's clear that what Nona and the Maori have been done is, you know, far ahead of us here in Hawaii. And I'm familiar with Mililani and her endeavors in Aotearoa and even in Hawaii Island, you know, because there was an RFP in 2015 for more geothermal energy that Hawaiian Electric Light put out. And Mililani and her group, you know, they went around the island. to do some outreach and such. But I hear a lot of similarities from what Nona shares, because here in Hawaii, the geothermal resource is considered a mineral, and the state claims the ownership of this the geothermal resource. And so as a result of that, for PGV, for example, so the royalties that PGV has to pay is split up amongst three groups. It's split up with the state. They get 50%. Then the county where the development is taking place, which is Hawaii County in the Puna district, is 30% of the royalties, and 20% goes to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So it's split up in that manner. But there are some initiatives going on with regards to Hawaiian homelands. So there are some interests from some folks. And part of that is similar to, I think, what's happening in New Zealand, is that if there is a geothermal development that's done on Hawaiian homelands, all of the compensation, the royalties, the lease, etc., the negotiations for benefits for Native Hawaiians would all go to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and the beneficiaries. So that is just something that's in discussion. So there's like an investigative group that's been formed by the Hawaiian Homes Commission that's kicking that up. The state has done other forums. There's been a working group that did a report some years ago on geothermal in Hawaii, and it's been a long time. PGV's been in commercial operation since 1993, and you can see it's not that easy because it started off at 25 megawatts, and today we're at 38. But we're actually in negotiations to increase our output. I think I mentioned before we want to increase by another 8 megawatts, so that'll take us to 46. So community, the outreach. It's something that we've been striving to, maintain and improve on. We have our next, we have quarterly meetings for Puna Geothermal Venture. Our next one is April 25th at the Pahoa facility. So we'll have announcements about that. But, so like I said, a great presentation, Nona, and we wish you guys the best. And, we wanna emulate what you folks have been doing. Mark talked about the hydrogen hub. We're also in consideration for that because we plan to be to 46 megawatts. We do have some permits that would allow us to go to 60. So that's something that can be considered to help support more clean energy initiatives like we have planned in Hawaii. That's the gist of what I wanted to share, and really looking forward to seeing some of the information and the publications that you get, Stan. Any
Thanks,
questions?
Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking in chat and I see a couple of questions that were sent directly to Nona, and so I don't know if he wants to respond to any of those directly. But thank you, Michael, for also bringing in our only geothermal experience that we have here in Hawaii. You're the owner of all that, so we thank you for participating in. I think all of us just get a little frustrated sometimes when we look at the system going forward, which should be good for everybody, and somehow it always ends up being not good for some people and way too good for other people. I think Nona's presentation is a good model or a good way to look at how we quantify those less tangible things like in culture and religion, spirituality, and that we really ought to look at those a little bit more closely in the future. So I'd like to thank all of our presenters today, Mark Glick, Nona, Nicole, Eugene, and Mike Kalikini for their presentations. And I'll turn it back over to Michael Markrich so he can close us out.
Okay. I want to thank everyone and Nona, what a great presentation. I was wondering, before we go, we have a question from Leilani Chow, who's on Molokai. And, Molokai, do you see her question, Stan? Do you see it? She says, She says, Mahalo, Pia e Noa, for sharing the awesome work you are doing. There are so many beautiful similarities between Maori and Hawaii's desire for self-determination to increase our standards and ability to care for and protect our people. And so she says, thank you very much for pointing that out. And so I think, Nona, you've had just a tremendous impact on our whole state and our whole community through your wonderful presentation. And I want to thank you for taking the time to meet with us here in Hawaii. Aloha to you, and thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. I'd be happy to answer these questions if we have time.
Okay. So here's another one. A typical timeline in New Zealand for a development is 5 to 7 years. And it seems like that's very fast. How can you do all this in 5 to 7 years and create a plant and an income stream in that time?
There's a lot of issues around that kind of timeline for Māori because Māori just don't have the resources to keep up with a 5 to 7 year project lifetime, project development. And so oftentimes it's Māori, they're on the back foot. They're having to respond to things happening in the project. And so they need to they're trying to keep up by expressing their concerns. But by the time that they've managed to write a well-rounded report of their concerns, the project's now at a different phase, and they're already considering other things to do in the future. So that timeline there, that is an issue. Even though it is happening, it's still an issue that needs to be fixed in Aotearoa. I saw, what was her name? Leilani asked, does Aotearoa have any non-surface geothermal energy plants similar to Hawaii, similar to the Puna geothermal? Or maybe, I'm not quite sure I understand the question if Leilani wanted to clarify.
I think what she's, we're aware that there's different types of geothermal. You have binary systems and you have systems that go really deep for really hot water. Most of the ones in Rotorua seem to be focused on surface, geologically hot water that's coming right to the surface. Like Nicole said, the only place we see that in Hawaii is on the Big Island right near the volcano. You'll see steam vents and things like that. And the Hawaiians used to use that for cooking sometimes. That's really the only example we have. Is there any deeper geothermal going on in New Zealand that's more like what we would probably do in Hawaii? Puna geothermal is fairly shallow, but it's a binary system, but it's still fairly deep compared to looks like what you're doing.
I don't know that we have geothermal reservoirs as deep as what is in Puna, but we do have geothermal fields with no geothermal features on top of them, which are considered to be deeper than the ones with geothermal features on top of them. And in those cases, geothermal development is actually a lot easier because there's less consideration in terms of possible cultural concerns for the land for geothermal features. So it's just a matter of here's the land. This is at the moment is pretty barren, and we can do something with it. And most of the times, Māori are completely for that because there aren't that many sites for them. Or there aren't many sites on their land that they value already. So maybe they need to find value from that land in other areas. So I think in Hawaii, with deep geothermal features and not many, or deep geothermal systems and not many geothermal features, that consideration of customary use that we have here in Aotearoa may be irrelevant.
Yeah, I've heard a similar discussion about Japan because, Japan has a lot of hot baths and things like that are geothermal. And when they try and introduce geothermal electricity generation in those areas, it's disruptive. It gets a lot of pushback. And it seems like that's a bigger issue in New Zealand than it would be in Hawaii, because like you say, most of ours is not very apparent for the most part. It's well below the surface. We don't have the cooking, we don't have the hot water baths, we don't have the old cultural practices that go along with geothermal, because it's all deep geothermal, deeper than what you have in New Zealand.
Yeah, I did I suppose a survey just around my hapu, whether they were for geothermal development in Rotorua, because Rotorua has a lot of geothermal features, and most Maori in Rotorua are opposed to geothermal development purely because they want to protect the customary uses of geothermal features.
It looks like is it Serene Farrar has her hand up?
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks, Stanley. Hi, I'm like the community engagement liaison for Puna District, which has PGV there. And so geothermal is an important part of our energy mix and conversation. And I would just like your insight as to anything that would make our community engagement better and more equitable and just. No, thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll answer that question. I just need to plug my laptop in.
Can I just say one thing? I was typing into the chat. I think that might help Leilani too. And Mike Kalakini, you should check me. But I'm pretty sure how in New Zealand electricity generation is produced is the same way PGV produces. So it's hydrothermal. It's taking hot fluids from the subsurface and re-injecting them back into the ground. That's for the electricity generation aspect, not the bathing and other direct use kind of aspect. And it's always in the subsurface then. So I think in Taupo, it was something like 1 to 2 kilometers below the surface. And in Hawaii, we produce from 2 to 3 kilometers below the surface. But the generation of electricity occurs in the same way.
Thanks, Nicole.
And to answer that question about Puna engagement, yes, there are, so in my framework, there are values that are defined. And so if Puna Geothermal Venture wanted to, I suppose, consider using some of the values detailed in that framework for further engagement with the Puna community, I'd definitely be supportive of that. And so, but the only thing is that because Puna Geothermal Venture is already established, the amount of freedom or the amount of variability that each value can be protected or provided for is very limited because Puna is already established. A lot has already been done, but it might be a matter of Puna Geothermal Venture going into the community, asking them to consider these values and whether they will ask the community how they might wish for these values to be provided for, and then consider, given the state of Puna Geothermal Venture now and its establishment, how they might be able to provide for each of those values. And so it's a very listed, itemized system. It's not a discussion. It's more of this value. How do we provide for that? Can we provide for it given limitations? This value, how do we provide for that? And so it's very itemized, and that's the way that engineers think, that kind of reductionistic way. And I think it's the most effective form of communication in this context.
Yeah, I think, Nona, what we're looking at is, Puna is a relatively small geothermal site, and we're looking at expanding geothermal across the state. I think using your model would be the best way to approach the community and say, if we meet all these things, is it okay or is it not okay? And we're gonna be on that range that you have from -2 to +2, throughout the different categories. And I don't know that we ever looked at anything like that as it went through the legislature, as it went through the permitting process, as it went through the cultural analysis. And I think that, so what your presentation gave us was a really good model to if we can't use it exactly, at least take the same concepts that you put in there and apply them to our particular government and business environment, and try and make it as equitable as we can between the parties so that everybody's well represented in the discussion. And I think that was the main thing that Michael and I wanted in this presentation, was to get your view from a totally different place and how you're solving it. Because a lot of times we're the worst case at looking at ourselves and trying to fix something because we don't see a lot. And when you come from a different island in the Pacific, but it's similar culture, you know, you can learn a lot. So we appreciate all that you shared with us.
I'd like to add just one more thing. Nona, on reading the background of geothermal in New Zealand, I understand that geothermal is considered water to be regulated, not a mineral to be regulated, and that made a difference in the way the laws were made. And this applies to Mike Kalakini's comment. How has it made a difference that geothermal is regulated as a water?
It doesn't make much of a difference. In Hawaii, it's considered a mineral, and it's owned by the state. It's the same here. Water can't be owned by people. It's owned by the government. And that's why if you own land on top of geothermal resources, you still need that resource consent to extract. Once it's extracted, once it's out of the ground, you now own it and you can sell it off. And that's what's happening in Kawero with the Tūwharetoa Geothermal Assets Limited. They don't own the geothermal resource, but they own the extraction of geothermal resource, the extraction operations, and then they sell that extracted fluid to the pulp and paper mill. I think there's a toilet paper factory that requires it as well. There's various geothermal power stations there that require it as well. So yes, once it's out of the ground, it's just the same as if it were a mineral, I suppose.
And there was one other thing. It was a restoration and re-injecting water into places. That this is something the Maori asked for specifically, because at some point, some Maori sacred sites were damaged by ground subsidence as a result of the withdrawal of water. So the Maori asked that the developer re-inject the water back into the ground to repair the subsidence.
Yeah.
How is that done?
So that was I'm not sure if you're talking about the case of Te Kirio Hinewai stream in Taupo, but yes, that did happen. And I suppose it's Māori making the best out of a sticky situation where, yes, it was a geothermal stream, and it had flowing geothermal water which went across terraces and then into hot pools that Māori used to use. But due to the way from the 1950s, late 1950s, after Wairake Geothermal Power Station, subsidence caused, and drawdown as well, caused that stream to no longer have geothermal water coming out of it at the top of it, at the catchment area. And so that stream became dry. When the Te Mihi power station was built, Ngāti Rangiita, they asked for Te Mihi to discharge their waste geothermal fluid, or some of it, into the Te Kirio Hinewai stream, which then replenished that flow, and then the flow of geothermal fluid onto the terraces into the hot pools. So it's, I suppose, just as much as geothermal power can damage geothermal features, it can also help to replenish it. And that's what Te Rangiita managed to do. The fluid is just the same. It comes out, goes through the power station, and then goes into the stream. It's just the same as if it came straight out of the ground and into the stream.
Oh, yeah, very good.
Michael, I'd like to add to what Nona just said. Even in the U.S., up at the geysers in California, for many, many years, the production there actually caused the amount of geothermal availability to decrease substantially. And then it was several years ago, maybe more than several years ago, where the city and county, I believe it's of Sacramento, was asked to re-inject the gray water to help support the resource there. So similar to what Nona is sharing with us. And so even like here at PGV, everything, all of the heat that comes up to help generate electricity, once it's cooled off, it's returned back via re-injection wells. And that's part of the aspect of renewable resource, because then the cooler fluids then hopefully will migrate towards the more hotter zones and then ultimately return back to surface.
Yeah, I should add that in Aotearoa, the only discharge from a geothermal power station is fresh water. It can't be grey water from geothermal resource. All geothermal fluid has to be re-injected, except for situations like I just mentioned, where they might discharge elsewhere to replenish geothermal features.
Oh, very interesting. Oh, well, thank you. I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of us. I think not just here, but all of us in the state of Hawaii who will get an opportunity to learn of your work. Thank you for your contribution, and aloha. And thank you, everyone.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Nona.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Nona. Definitely want to see your papers. The one that is published, in what journal is it published?
It's published in Alternative, a New Zealand international Indigenous journal.
Okay.
I can send a link to Stan and Michael, maybe.
That would be great.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks all.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.